Okay. Oops. I don't think I hit the live button yet. Okay, now we're live. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tom Cosentino from Park Right here. Unfortunately, Katrina is being a little bit under the weather. That's the problems with Parkinson's is one day you're good and one day you're not. But we have Joe Ferguson with us today. Joe has been diagnosed with Parkinson's for about 6 years now. He was in the Air Force, or excuse me, he was an officer in the Army, and he was in food service industry a little bit, and he's participated. And you started an actual support group, right?
I co-started, yes.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how that endeavor went?
Well, shortly after I got diagnosed, my mind was flipping out, which the doctor didn't tell me to be prepared for that, and
Yeah.
for about a week, and I had to talk to somebody, and I don't live near my family, about an hour away, but I need to go, and I had heard about support groups, and so I went to my first support group meeting in Newport News, Virginia, at a hospital support
Mm.
group. And I think that was my eighth day after diagnosis. And
Wow.
I got something out of that, and I started thinking back in my small town community across the James River, maybe I should try to start one because I was hearing that there was nothing like that over here, and there was not, in fact. And so I talked to some doctors about getting some names of people, and of course I ran into HIPAA problems, and
Oh, yeah.
just seemed like every way I turned to try to make sure try to make that happen, it wasn't falling into place. And I said, well, I guess that's not something that's going to happen here by my hand. And then years later, I started square dancing with my wife once a week to get the social and the physical exercise, and doing all those things that they tell us we need to maintain.
Yeah.
And it was being held at a church, in a lobby of a church. And while I was there one night, I looked in the trash can when I saw a church bulletin in the trash from, I guess, the previous Sunday. And I said, oh, let me look at this and see what this church has in their bulletin about goings on in this church, activities and such. And in the bulletin was a note about a prayer request for one of the church members who had Parkinson's and was going through a tough time because his medication was starting to fail him. And they were asking for
Wow.
prayer. And I said, wow, here's somebody like me, and maybe worse. And I don't know this person. So I tracked down through people I knew to find out who this person was. And so I've got the family email and wrote to the email. And his wife, the caregiver, wrote back. And I introduced myself, and we talked on the phone later. And she said, yeah, we've had this for some years now. And I was wondering, do you think a support group would go well in Smithfield? And I said, well, I think it ought to, but I kind of looked into that and I didn't know how to do it. And so she goes, well, I want to do it. And will you help me if I start it? And will you be there with me to help me get it going? I said,
Oh,
sure.
good.
So another thing I did was I looked up Michael J. Fox's book in the public library, and I checked it out and read it. But when I put the book back to the library to return it, I stuck a Post-it note on one of the pages inside the book and wrote a very short note about who I
Ah,
was and that I had Parkinson's and I lived in this community near Smithfield. And I was wondering if there was anybody that might read this book that was a Parkinson patient or caregiver that maybe they would contact me. And I put my phone number on this Post-it note, and one person did find it, and now she's a member of our one of the early members of our group, and she likes to tell that story, so I'm telling it.
you know, that's the
I'm, I'm
that's
telling
the
it to
coolest
Julie.
thing I've ever
Julie
heard. That
today.
is really
So if Julie's
that is
listening,
very cool. That's out of the box thinking.
well, hey, that's what you do when you're a soldier.
Yeah,
You're supposed to.
absolutely. You improvise.
That's right.
Well,
Overcome.
the reference Joe made, I served in the Army as enlisted, and Joe was an officer.
Right.
So how did you like your time in the military?
I liked it fine. I had good duty at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in the city of Columbia. It's actually within the
Mhm.
city limits, believe it or not. And I was there for 3.5 years after getting my training for the first 6 months at Fort Lee in Petersburg, Virginia. And I had a good time. That was a good duty. It was not hard. It was we were training the initial entry soldiers, which is boot camp, and then the trade school they go to right after boot camp. We
Mhm.
taught cooks and supply sergeants, supply specialists at Fort Jackson back in those days, and I was part of the administration that ran that training base. And I had a good duty and I enjoyed it.
I was a military policeman, and I worked with attack dogs, so I thoroughly enjoyed working with the attack dogs. Those they were fun. And when you
Were
went
they
to the
called
field,
were they considered the same thing as canine?
Yeah, the canine.
Okay.
So when you go to the field, you take your dogs with you. Nobody bothers you in the field. Nobody. They got to get past Rommel, my big dog, before they can get to me. I missed that time.
Yeah, that was fun.
So what other challenges did you have in trying to find people to build this support group?
Well, oh, I know what we did. I put an ad in the local town paper, county paper, Smithfield Times, that we were going to do that and put it on the community calendar, that type of thing, and
Yeah.
and and put the phone number. And we told them the time was going to be the fourth Saturday of each month at 10 o'clock a.m. at the public library in downtown Smithfield. And I have records of each meeting, how many people showed up, and I don't have them here right in front of me right now, but and I don't remember how many it was, but it was a respectable amount. I want to say like 12 or 15 in a small town. It was
That's a
pretty
good
encouraging.
size.
Yes, and
Yeah.
we've been up to as high as I think 25 at a monthly meeting, and so we got good response right off the bat, and it's continued to grow. And our list of names who have attended at one time or another is continuing to grow. Not everybody comes every month, but we have certain ones that do come every month, and I'm one of those, of course. And so is
Hmm.
the co-founder, and her name's Connie. And so we've touched a lot of people, and we get a lot of positive response. And I want to say also that that group that I went to in Newport News when I first got diagnosed during COVID, like all the other things, they shut down the support group, and we went for
Hmm.
quite a long time with no support group anywhere. And my group had not started yet. We started ours after COVID. We've been going about a year and a half now, and so I continued to go to that group until it was shut down by COVID. And then after COVID, that group eventually got started back. And I went, and because I was an old timer by that time, because other people had died or moved away or whatever, we didn't see them anymore. Um, I spoke up and I said, when this group was going before COVID, it really wasn't a support group. It was a lecture. We'd come in there, we'd sit around a table. We had a big square table set up with the smaller tables
Oh
formed in
yeah.
a rectangle, and somebody would speak to us and lecture us like the videos you see on the internet for Parkinson's information, and then everybody would get up and say, "Okay, see you next month," and they'd go home. And I'd never been to a support group before I got sick, but just by the common sense name of what it is says it is, that's not any support. That's education. So I made a strong case for I'd like to see this
Right.
group become a real support group. And so using that thought, that philosophy, we have done that with both the Newport News group, which I'm also involved in helping to lead, and the Smithfield group. And we let people talk. We if somebody new comes, we make them the focus of that meeting. Their first meeting, we try to say, "You seem to be new, and we welcome you personally, and we're glad you're here. And we would like you to, if you don't mind, tell us about yourself. So you have the floor. Talk to us about your situation, you and your caregiver, either one of you, both of you." And then after that, we ask them, do you have any questions that you would like to have answered today on your first visit to our group? Because we want you to leave here feeling like you've been fed some good information and you want to come back. And that model
Hmm.
seems to be working very well. And any groups that are not doing that, I'm sorry and sad that you probably having the same experience that I did initially. Is that all you're doing is being educated, but you're not getting the support. And you can get educated on the internet all day long and all night long around the
Hmm.
clock, but you don't get support really that good in my view, unless you're there to talk with people and look in their eyes and see their body
Right.
language and hear their stories in a way that sometimes you can't do on a computer.
That's kind of like what we want to do here is we don't necessarily want to bring specialists or doctors or whatever and just lecture people for an hour because like I said, you can get that on the internet but we just want to have conversations with people with Parkinson's just because it's kind of like in the beginning, we wanted to talk to somebody that we wish would have talked to us when we were first diagnosed. So we
Exactly.
just try to throw some information out there, introduce some other people. You know, the point you make about the support group it being more lecture driven in the beginning, I've found the same problem here, and I've found that I call myself a tweener. I'm not quite young onset Parkinson's because I was diagnosed at 56, but I'm not the 65-year-old grandfather who got diagnosed either. But I
Right.
find that the YOPDs or the young onset Parkinson's disease they're still working. They still have families. It's very difficult for them to attend these meetings because they're generally during the day in our area. So then there's the older group of people who they're more, it's kind of a social issue thing for them as well, which I can appreciate. But then they also do training sessions, but the training sessions are geared for people like over 70 because that's the majority of the people in our group. So I find that myself, I belong to 3 support groups, and they're all online right now because most of them are common, like people with the same concepts, the same age groups, and we can have better conversations than we can if we just did it in a church basement or something.
Well, you said something that reminded me of something I failed to tell you, and I agree with, and that is that was one of those things that I ran into initially thinking about starting a group way back. Was that I was still working, just like you said, and I have a family, and I still even today have a child still in school, living in the house, and that thing about
Wow.
meeting during the daytime, that was definitely a bad problem that I ran into, and I just glad you reminded me of it. But because now I'm on disability, I don't have that issue. But even still, the groups that I go to,
Right.
I'm I'm one of the youngest people there, and I'm 62. Most people are still that come to those things are still
Yeah, I feel like at
working
65, I'm a
working
youngster.
exactly. And I shouldn't have said most people, a significant number of them, but also that's another reason we had we set our support group on a Saturday, not on a weekday, because we wanted to do it for that very reason. For the people that are working, that have obligations during the week, anybody can come, whether they're retired or not, on a Saturday, unless they have something they have to do on Saturday morning, of
Mhm.
course. But we have a better chance to catch the broad net as opposed to just those people that are retired age.
Well, there's a group, support group called, her name is Anna Grill, ANNA Grill, GRILL. She's a young onset. She started a support group and it's just taken off. They usually meet at night once a month. We do maybe one or two meetings a month. One's like a social meeting, and then one is kind of more of an informational meeting. But for those people out there, I say under 60 or in that cusp, it, Google Anna Grill, young onset Parkinson's, and join her group. It's just what she does is simply amazing. I don't know where she got the energy to do everything, but you could tell that she was I want to say type A professional when she was working, and she's taking that same attitude towards let's get it done, and into this project, and it's just amazing what she has to offer.
Great.
So to
I've
me,
heard that
that's
name.
one of the
I've heard that name, but I don't know where I heard it. But I know I've. Is it ANN or ANA?
ANNA.
Two N's. Okay, I thought maybe it was one. But yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard
two
that
N's.
name somewhere.
Yeah, what she does, and I look forward to those groups because once a month we just break down into sessions. There's maybe 6 of us, and we just talk about a conversation. We can jump in and out of the conversations. Like, she'll put us in rooms. Like room one's going to talk about this, room two, and you initially get in a room, and then you just jump in and out to talk about different things. And I find that very helpful. And like on Wednesday nights, we do just a small group of us, about 6. We call it our stupid hour, and we're all just basically the same age group, the same background, and we just get stupid for an hour, and we just have great conversations. I think that's the thing about a support group is when you walk in that room, you're not alone. Everybody in that room has someone, even though Parkinson's treat is different in everyone. You walk in that room, you have that shared experience. It's kind of like if I in the military, you see a fellow person in the military, you immediately have a connection because you've got those shared experiences. That's what
Right.
I like about support groups. I think they're very, especially in the beginning. Like I know my neurologist said to me after a couple of visits, I think you have Parkinson's, come back in 30 days. And I walked out of there in the parking lot and I was just devastated. It's like, what do you mean I think I have Parkinson's? And in hindsight, she should have put it more like, I think you may have Parkinson's, but it's not something we can basically pursue or deal with unless we have a little more history so I can see how you're changing, stuff like that. But she was just very blunt. I think you have Parkinson's, come back in 30 days.
Yeah,
So if it
that
wasn't
was
for a
one
couple good support groups, I think I'd have been lost.
that very point is one of the same things that I said very early on, is that I think it was a shortcoming, and where I went was part of a major hospital group. There's medical groups that all the hospitals belong to now. It's a respectable, the main one in my region. And I said, I don't think it's good that they give you a diagnosis and then send you out the door and they don't give you any heads up. I think they ought to say, because it happened to me, and I suppose it happens to a lot of other people. Maybe not, but I bet it does. Is you go home and think about it, and you do a little research, and you realize this is serious business, and it works on your head. And
Hmm.
I think they should give you a heads up that is very likely to occur, and talk you through some ways to deal with that, or some short term ways of coping because you don't know what you're getting ready to do. It's bad enough to hear it, but then you go home and you realize it and it sinks in. It was a rough week for me, but I finally got through it. But I wished I didn't
One
have
of the
to.
things that, as I get more into the podcast and more into things, I'm trying myself to make some changes in that I'm trying to put together what I call a holistic approach to Parkinson's. Because as you get the doctor, you see the doctor, he says you have Parkinson's, and then you follow up with them in 6 months. But there's physical therapists, there's occupational therapists, there's speech therapists, there's your primary care doctor, there's your neurologist, there's your physical trainer, there's maybe there's so many different things once you have Parkinson's that can touch you. But there is no checklist when you walk out of the doctor's office and says, here, take a look at this. This is some information that may be helpful to you.
Yes. Well,
But as much as I love my doctor, and I'll sing the praises of my movement disorder specialist to anybody. He's a great doctor, but yet he's just a neurologist, and he doesn't deal with the larger thing. Like maybe you should talk to this. Here's something about physical therapy you should look at. He's just basically a great neurologist. So I've taken the point to build my care team, and it's something that I think a lot of people need because there's like, I didn't know that. You get a lot of this. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
But to be fair, when they sent me out the door, as you say, they handed me I think it had a staple in it, a small stack of Xerox type copies of pages out of a handbook from somewhere. It was Xeroxed quite a few times, it looked like, but that they did give me some reading material.
Yeah.
And I did study that, and then of course from there I went on to expand and start looking at beyond that. And then some people think you shouldn't do that either, but if I've got an enemy that's going after me, I got to know who he is and figure out how I'm going to deal with him. I can't just pretend that he's not there and be foolish like that. So, but I did get some information.
Absolutely. I like to, before I have a conversation with somebody, I've always liked to Google them because I want to know like you said, I want to know who I'm talking to as well. So I want to do my research.
Yeah, that's due diligence, we call that.
Yeah, I remember when I first interviewed at the Davis Finney Foundation to be an ambassador. The young lady I was talking with, I made the comment that I saw your podcast that you did, a webinar you did a couple of years ago, and how you talked about the program. She goes, "You did what?" I said, "I saw your podcast." She goes, "Well, how did you do that?" Well, I Googled your name, and I Googled the organization, and I read about the organization, and I watched the video that you presented. She goes, no one's ever done that before. I said, well, I'm different, I came from, like, I agree with you. You need to know not who the enemy is per se, but you need to know who you're dealing with so you can better deal with them.
Of course. Another thing I wanted to say about the support groups we were talking about earlier was one of the things we did at our support group, and we've done it at both of them, is not every month, but occasionally we do this, and it's to divide the group along the lines of, say, caregivers and patients.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about doing it males and females because there's issues that you might not want to talk about in front of the opposite sex in a open discussion. And there's maybe some other distinctions that we have not thought of yet, but that's one we have done, and the other one we're going to do. And the reception when we mentioned it to the group as an option, maybe for a future meeting, they seem to be enthusiastic about doing it that way, once in a while. So that gives us a chance to get some things on the table that otherwise, even between caregivers and patients, they don't always want to talk about their rough times in front of their own loved one. And so, it just makes a better atmosphere to be able to speak more freely.
Yeah, I know my wife goes with me to my neurology meetings now because she adds a point of view that I don't see the changes because they're just slowly happening, but she can see the differential between me, 6 months ago and currently. So she's definitely an asset when I bring her along with me because she has a whole different perspective.
Yes.
Because part of it, I go see the doctor. He goes, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm fine." He says, "Well, I'm fine. I have Parkinson's. I'm fine." But my wife says, "No, I've noticed he's doing this, and I notice he's doing that," and that's really valuable information for him.
Well, when I'm talking to my wife about something that I've noticed, she'll remind me that I have a little notebook that I keep all my Parkinson notes in. She tells me, write that in a notebook for your next visit. Because sometimes I think about it and I talk about it, but I forget to write it down. And then I think when I go to my meeting with my doctor, I go, what was that I was going to talk about? So I need to write it down.
Well, here's something I do, and I try to make everyone aware of it. It's so much easier. Every doctor probably has a portal that you can send communications to, back and forth. So about a
Yes.
week before my appointment, I go on the portal and I send them a list of things I want to talk about. These are the changes I've seen. This is what I want to discuss with. So my thing is when I walk in that door with him and say, "How you doing?" We have the old smoke and joke, if you will, and then we get down to business. I want him to go right down because I only get him for maybe 20, 30 minutes at a time, and that's
Right.
every 6 months. I don't want to spend half my time saying, "Well, this has been bothering me. This has been bothering me." So I just keep a journal and then I type it up. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. And I send him notes a week before so he's ready for when I walk in.
That seems like a good idea. I had not thought of that. One thing I'll say about that portal
Yeah.
that my Parkinson doctor had to speak to me about early on, to call me down on it, and new people might have the same experience. At some point after a few months, I had some questions, and I sent several of those messages on that portal thing to the doctor, um, asking about some specific things. And I think I wrote 3 questions, and she said that's not the purpose of this portal, to overwhelm us with questions, because we've got a lot of patients, and
Really?
you need to you need to save that for the visit. And of course, I felt embarrassed and ashamed that I had to be told that, but that's the way it works, and that's what that's
No,
supposed to
no.
be.
You
So,
know what? I would say that I'm a big advocate for advocating for yourself. And if I had an appointment with the doctor who talked to me like that, I would probably start to see if I can find another neurologist because I understand. But I just to me, I don't what that said. This just doesn't fly
yeah, well,
because I
I
have to look. I
understand.
have like I call it the. I think I call it the Marcus Welby theory to a certain extent. Everybody in our age remembers Marcus Welby. He wore the white jacket. He had the tie. He was a god. When he said something, you did it. And I think now that a lot of older people, especially as I get to know the Parkinson's patients, they're like they don't feel like they have the right to challenge their doctor. And I try to advocate in the sense I call it the George Costanza theory. Everybody knows who George is from Seinfeld. And if you go any situation, regardless of what it was, and if you don't feel you're being treated correctly, just ask yourself a simple question: what would George do? And if George wouldn't be happy, then why should you be happy or not happy? And because it's just a way of like I like to find simple concepts that go across the board. Just what would Joe do? And I mean, what would George do? And George is a narcissistic individual. He's gonna do what's best for him. And it's just like it's hard, I think, for people to understand that they have every right to talk to their doctor, not in a demeanor or in a bad way, but they have every right to challenge the doctor on those. Yes, doctor, that is your issue. When I come in here, I expect you to know what this information is. The drawback is there's not a lot of neurologists out there, so sometimes you feel like you're stuck with the one that you have.
Yeah, well, I think that's
I like
true.
to
And
share a story with my first time I met my neurologist. It was funny because, of course, when I got firstly diagnosed or tentatively diagnosed as something else, they said essential tremor and a pinched nerve. And I'm like, what's the odds of having two separate things happen to me at the exact same time? So they referred me to a neurologist that was associated with the hospital. And I said, I went there a couple, 3 times. She's very clinical. And then finally, when she said, I think your Parkinson's come back in 30 days, I had just started physical therapy with a physical therapist who worked a lot with Parkinson's patients. We had a conversation. And she goes, here's the name of another general neurologist you can call. And here's the name of a specialist. It's going to take you probably 6 months to see the specialist. So call the general neurologist, which I did, and I explained to her my situation and said, I don't want to feel like I want to be out open with you. Are you okay seeing me until I get into the specialist, the movement disorder? And she was fine with that. So the first time I meet with my doctor, he's asking me the checklist. You grow up on a farm, you drink well water. And he asked me if you ever fell into a vat of acid. And I'm like, well, no, but as a teenager, I was bitten by a radioactive spider, and now I got this crazy spider sense. And he looked at me and goes, Peter Parker? I said, yeah. He goes, why'd you say that? I said, why'd you ask me if I fell into a vat of acid? I'm like, Doc, this is the money, And if I fell into a vat of acid, this wouldn't be the money, Doc. So, and he said, well, I said, obviously I'm listening, so are you, because you picked up on the Peter Parker reference. And that was the moment that I knew I liked his sense of humor. I liked this guy, and we've had like a bromance for 9 years now.
Wow, that's a cool story.
But I can give you like the last session that I went with him. He met me, came out to out of his office area into the waiting room. He said, "Tom, you're all set." He gave me a big hug. My wife and I walked in together. We talked for probably 35, 40 minutes, and then in the end, he gave me another hug. He said, "I'll see you in 6 months." And then he looked at my wife like most people said. He goes, "I don't know how you deal with dealing with this man." So I think that's most people ask my wife that question after they get to know me a little bit. But that's a relationship that I wish everyone could have. I try to keep simple things. Like I say, I call it the 4 pillars. When you get newly diagnosed, you got to find a great support group. You got to find a really good doctor. You got to start eating better, and you got to start exercising. And those, I think, if you without trying to overwhelm people, if you can focus on those 4 things and build your care group around those concepts, I think you're much better off. Because I look at something where I was an economics major, and I still think in kind of economic terms. And I look at it in the sense that there's 2 things I remember from economics. One is you want to maximize your utility value, and utility value is anything you assign a value to. So you want to maximize that. And also, I say economics is the allocation of scarce resources. So when I try to apply that to people with Parkinson's, I'm like, your scarce resources, your on time. Because as you start having more off time and more issues, you've got to take that on time that you have and get the most out of that arm time that you can, so that when you can basically find out what's most important to you and then apply it within the time frame that that you have. And to me, that works well for me because it forces me to know that like in the mornings I'm better than I am at night. So I make sure that if anything's important for me, like if I'm doing research or reading, I try to do it in the morning as opposed to later in the afternoon at night, because the retention level isn't as great.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But a lot of it is, I think, if we can teach people how to advocate for themselves, I think that goes a long way. I met somebody who was initially diagnosed, and I said, "Well, what kind of medication are you on?" And she was our age. She goes, "I'm not sure. He just gave me these meds to take." I'm like, I got mad for a moment. I said, "Wait a minute. You were just diagnosed with a progressive disorder, neurological disease. Your doctor gave you medication. You really don't know what it does. You don't know the side effects, but you said it's okay because your doctor gave it to you." And I'm like, that's crazy. I like people. I like in everything that I do. Like I look at it in a sense with my doctors. I have to feel like my doctor has my best interest at heart. And if he doesn't, then I won't. I've been fortunate that I've always had a good primary and I've had a good neurologist. Like I tell my last primary that when I saw him a couple months ago, I said, what I like coming here, doc, is I feel like I'm just having a conversation with a really smart friend. Because that's the approach that we take. We're friends. He knows more than I do. That's why I come to see him.
Well, I'm one of those people that got sent to a neurologist,
So
a regular
what kind of
neurologist
challenges are you
first.
having now?
Well, my tremor is, depends on the time of day, and whether I'm excited like I am now to be talking to you. Um, that comes and goes, of course.
Well,
Um,
usually that happens mostly to women, by the way.
you think so?
Yeah, most women get excited when they talk to me, not so much with the men.
Yeah.
Well, again, this
Okay.
is the money.
I hear you. uh,
Yeah, I like to use is my secret power, but for better or for worse, is stupid humor. I'm a lightning rod for stupidity, I like to tell people.
yeah, that works for you then. Um,
Yeah, it
I,
works.
so I guess besides the tremor, uh, you know, sometimes we have these things that I call unmentionables, or things we don't talk about in polite company. That's some phrases I've used at a support group.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why I want to have them divide the group at least one time between men and women, so we can talk about some of
Right.
those things. And then, of course, may not be appropriate on an internet show either. But those
No.
abdominal things that can mess you up as part of your brain going drying up and blowing away. Um, I would say I deal with those kind of things. Um, I used to when I first got diagnosed, for I think the first 4 years, I had an excellent exercise program going on right off the bat, and I very faithfully was doing all that walking and power walking, and getting that heart rate up for an extended period of time for so many minutes per week. You know all that. And I was faithfully doing that 3 days every week. And then I started to develop some pain in my big toe on my right foot, and it was hurting me to walk because if you're power walking, you're taking long strides and you're doing them quick, and so you're pushing off with that back foot, and you're doing it over and over and over many times a week. And so my big toe joint got what I found out later on was some form of arthritis, and I went to a podiatrist, a professional about feet, and he put me in a boot, and I'd already had back surgery the same year I got diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so I have a sensitive back. If I'm racked out of square, my back pinches a nerve, and so I have to maintain a good posture. Well, he put that boot on one foot, and then I went home in less than 24 hours. I couldn't stand up, and I couldn't walk right, and I had what I called number 7 pains for about 6 weeks afterwards. But I went and called the podiatrist office, and I said, I looked at the literature after I hurt my back with this boot you gave me to fix my foot problem. And it says right in the literature that if you wear this boot, you need to wear a leveler on the other shoe or on the other foot.
Yeah, so you maintain your stride.
Not just your stride, but your posture, your plumb lines, vertical, your good vertical system.
Yeah, I like that. Your plumb line.
Without being racked out of line. And he said to me, he said, yeah, we know about those things, but nobody wears those. Nobody uses those leveling things. I said, well, it's apparent to me that I should have. I've had back surgery at this same practice. Your people know that I've had surgery on my back out of this practice. And obviously it's hurt my back, and I pinched a nerve again within less than 24 hours of putting the boot on my foot. And that screwed me up for so many weeks. And when I came back to my walking pattern after I recovered from that, my gait was messed up. And I've not been able to get it back. And that's been over 2 years now. And I'm really kind of angry that happened. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. And I don't know how to get back to my excellent gait. I remember thinking back then, I said, I should take videos of myself doing this walking. Maybe one day I won't be able to do it. And it's exactly what happened. And so now I walk like a lame horse. I kind of limp. My head does. That's another thing. That's something I deal with very much. When I try to walk, my head bobs up and down like a chicken or a horse. Look at either one of them, you'll see what I mean. Wow. And it's very irritating. It's miserable. And I haven't found any solution for that yet. But that podiatrist messed me up.
Have you tried cycling instead of walking?
Yes. I do ride my bike, but not in the same way that I did that 180 minutes a week thing when I was doing the power walking. I just ride it to go from here to there. But I guess that's my only other option, really, that's anywhere near comparable to walking.
Yeah, because I find that when I'm riding my bike, I don't have Parkinson's. It seems like the tremors go away, and I'm just riding my bike. And I do an indoor spin class now because I can take my bike outside. Delaware is fairly flat, so I can do a good 10, 15 miles out here. But I don't feel like I get the same intensity that I get if I go to a spin class. So I just started going to a spin. And I'm going to do that 3 days a week. And 2 days a week, I'm going to do weights. And every morning, I try to do some kind of yoga or stretching.
Well, have you come across the research that shows that cycling is not as good as weight-bearing exercise on your feet?
I'm going to say from my understanding, they're two distinct things. But because here, let me grab something for a second.
Yeah, I've heard they're not equivalent, and that the better thing of the two by far is being on your own 2 feet and bearing weight on your own leg muscles. There's some kind of benefit from that you don't get from cycling.
This is a book that a friend of mine wrote through the Davis Finney Foundation. It's called Parkinson's: How to Reduce Symptoms Through Exercise, and her name is Christine Muldrum. This is a great book, and you can get this. I always plug her book. You can get it on Amazon. But what she has in the back, she calls it the cocktail, and it's going to be hard to see, so I'll just read you the cocktail. Okay. There's 5 levels to the cocktail. The bottom level is high-intensity training, and that could be the power walking, it could be cycling. Then PD-specific work, which may be stretching exercises. Strength training, which is weightlifting, and then flexibility and balance, but more importantly, find what you love. So while everything with those groups, everything is part of the whole. Not one is not necessarily better than another. It's sort of a holistic approach. So what I'm trying to do is like cycle 3 days a week. That's where I get my high intensity, do the yoga and stretching in the morning, so I get that balance and work on balance. And then I'm starting now to do the weight training, but I'm not lifting weight for muscle in a sense. I'm lifting weight for toning, so I can, keep. Like I jokingly say, I got the muscle. But it's as strange as it may sound, because when I try to do this, my arms get kind of tough. The biceps don't let me go any further because I'm like hitting the muscles sort of contracted. So I'm trying to work now on just more stretching the muscles out as opposed to building them up.
Right. Well, I guess that sounds like low weights, high repetitions.
Yeah, something similar to that. Yeah, I went to see not a physical therapist, but a personal trainer. He's going to put together an exercise platform for me, so on the weightlifting, and then I'll work the other ones in. But the one thing is, they have proven with Parkinson's is that high intensity aerobic exercise 3 times a week will delay the progression. It won't stop it, it won't reverse it, but it will delay the progression. And there's a lot of studies that have tracked people who weren't exercising to now that they are exercising, and there's a distinct benefit to the people who exercise on the progression of the Parkinson's. Plus, there's nothing wrong with exercising. It has so many other valuable things. It lowers your risk of obesity, lowers your risk of all these other things. So that's what they kind of say. Once you get diagnosed with Parkinson's, your new part-time job becomes exercising because you have to almost do it every day.
Well, not only the exercise, but all the time spent on the telephone. In my case, with the Social Security and the VA and my state employers, retirement disability program managers, and uh, all those agencies that you deal with, man,
Mm.
pharmacies. That is another big part of the part-time job that it consumes besides just the exercising time. And people say they're going to try to keep on working as long as they can, and I admire that, but I don't know how they're going to do that and take care of their health, because it does take a lot of time. And if you're spending 40, 50 more hours a week at work, you got to sleep and you got to eat and you got to spend some time with your family.
Hmm.
I don't know how you can do all that, but I tried to do it for 18 months and I did, and then I said I'm done.
I
But
worked for 4 years, but the stress of my job was killing me.
yeah,
I still don't know in hindsight if I quit, if I got fired, or I went on medical leave of absence, never coming back. Either way, I know I walked out the door and I never came back.
wow,
But I got Social Security disability in the beginning. I had short-term disability, which then went to long-term disability. But I actually had to get a lawyer to fight for me on the long term, and they finally did. So I got the Social Security benefits, and now I have like an annuity that I got set up. And recently, and this is what we talked about briefly the other day. I was in the military at Fort McClellan, Alabama, for 4 months, and at Fort McClellan, it was later shown that toxic waste because during the 70s they produced chemicals for Vietnam. There was a Monsanto plant locally, so I never thought there was going to be anything of it. But after 5 years of going back and forth, they finally agreed that my Parkinson's was the result of or contributed to by my time at Fort McClellan. And so, to the best of my knowledge, I'm trying to work now with some VA groups and VFWs and American Legions. I think from my reading and stuff and looking things, I can't find anybody else who got a settlement with the VA from Fort McClellan. So I want to be able to pass. Excuse me a second. Gotta stop that. That was my phone telling me it's time to take my meds. Uh, so I haven't been able to find anybody who successfully, sued the VA and was found disabled because of their time at the VA. So for me it's a good thing because first of all it helps. I got some financial benefits from it, but secondly I'm hoping to open the door to other veterans who went through VA or went through Fort McClellan to see if they can have any opportunity to file suit against the VA for financial compensation.
I guess that makes you a trailblazer in that regard.
Yeah, and I tell you, on the other side, I hate this because, be honest, part of me was financial. If I had money coming back, because I went from making X amount of dollars to long-term disability to making less than X. But we've cut back. We were frugal individuals, and now I feel like I have the opportunity. I don't have to worry about money as much as I used to, which is one of the worry and stress doesn't help Parkinson's in the least bit.
Right.
So,
Well, when you say that about your salary being cut, it sounds like a good time that I can bring this to people's attention. I worked for the state of Virginia for 24 years, and my employee handbook says that if you go on long-term disability, you're going to get 60% of your previous salary as your
Right.
as your benefit. And it turned out that the money that I'm getting, apparently, from what I understand, is actually the money comes from Social Security, and it does not equal the 60% until you consider the money that was additional, because I still had children, minor children in my house, and Social Security under disability allows them a benefit for the parent that's
Oh,
disabled until they turn 18. And I have three sons, and one by one they've aged out and gone on, but I still got one now. But I only get that 60% if you consider the money for the child that was added in. And what I'm describing is a system, apparently, and don't want to speak wrong, but this is how I've understood it, and I've explained it to the lawmakers, and they seem to understand what I'm saying. The state is riding on the backs of the disabled people, their children. They're riding on the backs of those children by letting that money that comes in for the child be the top of the 60% cutoff. Below that is what you're getting as an
yeah.
employee disabled, but they're using the children to help the state benefit financially by not paying out as much benefit, and they call it an offset. And they do
Yeah,
it
I hate
because
offsets.
they do it because they say they're allowed to do it by law. They're quick to quote, the law says we have to do it this way. When I challenged it, they said, if we were to change this for you, we would endanger the entire retirement system for the state employees of Virginia. It would break our budget. I said, just for disabled children's parents' children, I don't believe that, but that's what they keep
Right.
saying, and that's why they say they can't make a change to the law. I think
Well,
that's disgusting. That's not Social Security's intent to award money for children and then have it go to the states to offset the
mm.
benefit that the employee was supposed to have already earned at 60%, whether he had children or not. That should not play into it at all. It makes me
Yeah, I've
mad, but
learned
that's
a
what
couple
it
of
is.
things on long-term disability. If it's employer paid, like if your employer paid for your long-term disability, it's taxable income. If you bought it out of your own pocket, it's not taxable income. But like I was given 50% of my salary, but when you mentioned the offset, so just to make up some numbers, if I was getting paid 50,000 a year, but Social Security was giving me 20,000 a year, then the long-term disability would only fill the void of 30,000, because in both cases, they're not going to allow me to make more than 50% of my total salary, which to me, I didn't realize in the sense that you couldn't double dip, which was kind of surprising.
Sounds similar, yes.
And I remember when I ended up suing them because I went through short-term disability was easy, but when they denied my long-term disability, because this was during COVID, and I was having scheduled back surgery, and they wanted to have a meeting with what's called a neurological psych test, a neural psych test to see my cognitive skills and such. So they scheduled me for an appointment like a week before my surgery, and I said, well, we're in the midst of COVID. I will attend the meeting, but here are my conditions. We have to be in a large room, at least 10 feet away. One sitting at one end of the table, I'm sitting at the other end of the table. And then he's got to realize that we both have to wear masks, because if I get COVID, if I test positive for COVID, I can't have my surgery. And they use that as a precursor to say I wasn't willing to work with them. And they failed. At that point, they didn't renew my insurance. That's when I
Wow.
called the lawyer, and we ended up suing them. And at the end, it was interesting because the person I was working with at the long-term disability actually said, "We owe you an apology. We should have approved you from the get-go."
Wow, that's terrible.
Because I look at it as Social Security, the long-term disability is a private company. And I don't want to sound, I just think they were trying to make as much money as they possibly could at the expense of, like you were saying, by taxing you in a sense for having children.
Yeah. And I let Social Security know about this, but I can't get them to. They don't seem like they're interested. I thought they would be upset knowing that their money that they designated for a child's benefit was going to the benefit of the state instead. Uh,
Yeah.
what can you do? I don't know. I've done all I think I know how to do.
So you're on long-term disability?
Yes. I don't know whether it was the state's contractor that handled this or not, but I want to tell you something. Anybody that's going to be going through disability consideration, the organization that handled my case was called ALLSUP, ALLSUP. I think that's how you spell it. There's either one L or two, but ALLSUP or one L. Man, they handled my case. I didn't have to get involved. There was no hearings. There was no lawyers. There was no judges. It was approved the first time through. And then on the internet, I've heard about all these people that have these other nightmare situations they have to wade through for years and years and years, paying lawyers percentages.
Yeah.
Allsup was excellent. Let me just say that.
Well, I know when I hired, I was in Maryland at the time, and Maryland caps the amount of money that someone can, a lawyer can bill you for Social Security disability. So I hired a local law firm. They did a wonderful job. It was every dime I paid them was well worth it, because like I said, I didn't have to deal with anything. They actually once a week they would call me up just to see how I was doing.
Great, good story.
Yeah, but then so it's funny now that I have the veterans disability, I'm still trying to get a clarification on whether or not long-term disability considers that as income. And if they do, that offsets it. They're not going to pay me anything if they consider my disability as income. So there's part of me that wants to say, so I served my country. As a result, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And now the money that the government says is owed to me because of the Parkinson's is just basically going to be transferred, or it's going to lower my overall average because I won't get long-term disability any longer. So I just notified them in the beginning just to be on the safe side, made a note of my, the time I called them, the conversation, and I haven't heard back from them in 2 weeks. So I feel in my case, I've done my due diligence. I notified them of the outcome. And it's up to them to do anything at this point. I'm not going to remind them anymore.
Right.
But financially, that's one of the things that really affect people with Parkinson's when they get to the point that they lose their job or they can no longer continue to do their job. It's a big financial blow.
Well, I would like to say that when I talked about going on disability after 18 months after diagnosis, the distinctive thing about my career was that I was in obviously a very high stress employment situation. I was a inspector for the state government of businesses in industry and also in retail levels, and I had to write violations of the state law on a daily basis and then present a written report to people multiple times a day who were not happy about getting it. And I didn't mind talking to them about it. I did it for 24 years. But as the years went on before I got diagnosed, this tremor thing would really come out when I was having to deal with somebody that was being difficult about the facts that I had to lay out in front of them for public safety.
Mm-hmm.
And their resistance and irritation and all that would get was not that I was scared because I was face anybody, but my subconscious reacted to that. And they would say, "Why are you shaking? Are you cold? Are you scared?" And of course I was neither, but it was kind of unprofessional looking, I guess, but I couldn't help it. And I did it as long as I could. And then I had to give it up.
Yeah, same here. It's just, that was one of the most bitter things. If I look back in my history with Parkinson's, the one thing that stands out is the interaction between my employer and myself and how that all fell out. I haven't talked to anybody since I left 9 years ago. Well, I'm sorry, I left like 5 years ago. It was just not a good experience for me. And so I do kind of caution people who, when they're thinking of going on unemployment or long-term disability, just document everything you can. Document, document, and document. You have a conversation with somebody, follow up with an email. I do now, like I'd say I had a conversation with you and you're my HR person. Later that day, I would just send you an email, basically just documenting the gist of the conversation, what we both agreed to do. So now I had a paper trail.
Don't forget the documentation. You don't know what you don't know, and you didn't know prior to diagnosis you even had a disease, much less what it was. And you certainly didn't know. You certainly didn't know that the symptoms could go back 10 or 20 years in your past, unknown what was causing it. And so that can cause somebody some serious problems in their employment for a number of reasons. And they don't, and their employer does not know what's wrong with the person because the person himself doesn't even know that that there's anything wrong with him yet.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I noticed that I had some difficulties in my employment, but when I announced finally that I had Parkinson's and I told them that I was going to be going out, on the tail end of that, I think my boss was very much more kind and considerate of me because I don't know, maybe she might have done some research and seen that there was things going on in my head that I wasn't even in charge of and I didn't know yet. But I noticed a difference in the way I was treated on the way out the door than what I had been prior to that.
Yeah, I like the term out the door because that's basically what happened. You were let out the door.
Yeah.
Same here. But that's in one respect, I look at my life today and financially we're okay. We live in a good community. I have good kids, a great wife, and I've been diagnosed 9 years ago and I'm still very minor. Like I have tremor base and the medication helps me greatly. I just took my meds about 30 minutes ago. So I've tried for what it's worth out there. For those people who have off time, on time with Cinemet, what I started doing was I initially was taking 1.5 tablets 4 times a day. So like roughly every 4 hours, I would take some of my medication. And I noticed my on time started waning off and a little more off time. So what we did instead of I'm still taking 6 tablets, but I'm taking 1 tablet every 2.5 hours. And the idea is when you take the carbidopa levodopa, you take it and the dopamine levels sort of go up, and then they have like a half life, then they go down, they go up, and they go down. But
Hmm.
when I started taking this a little bit less, a little more often, instead of more or less doing this, it's now more of a smooth up and down, which kind of levels me out a little bit. So I don't
Yes.
have any really bad tremors. I don't have any. The symptoms are manageable, I should say, and that's partly because I think the way we're currently taking my meds.
Well, the way you just described that, has it occurred to you that that is exactly the principle that is being applied with these technologies that are feeding people paste through the intestine, or these subdermal
Yes,
lines that are putting liquid medicine in at a steady rate throughout the day? That takes all the humps and downs up and down out
absolutely.
of
So right now, I look at things as from path of least resistance. This is the first thing. If this doesn't work, then I may look at something else. And then, like I like the way my doctor approaches my medication. He starts with the least amount of medications necessary because he says I can medicate you to any level you want to be at, but there are repercussions down the road. Like so, I just want to be at I want to say the basic functioning individual. So we've actually in the last year we've actually taken some of my meds off and declined a couple of them, which hasn't had a major impact, which I'm very happy about. Because I know the medication is necessary, but I just don't like taking meds.
So what you're describing is you're currently in your sweet spot and you want to stay there long as possible.
Yeah, without overdoing it with the dopamine.
Yeah.
Because I've had two notable neurologists say that they recommend that when the moment you're diagnosed is you should start taking dopamine in order to maintain that quality of life. Other doctors say what's the long-term impact of levodopa or dopamine that causes dyskinesia. So there's still kind of two schools of thought out there. And while I don't want to have dyskinesia, I certainly don't want to have tremors either. I got to find that. I'm trying to find that balance.
Well, let me ask you a question about to whittle a finer point on something you just said. When you get diagnosed, you think you should start taking dopamine. When you say taking dopamine, does that include taking the instead of dopamine the drugs that reduce the loss of dopamine? That's what you include that in that comment as one of the other
Yes, like
options.
so example, I take the Cinemet or lead covered up, and I also take a drug called a tacopone. The tacopone is what's called a COMT inhibitor. It's a very long word, but
Yeah, yeah.
what that tacopone does is allow for more delivery of the dopamine into the brain, that's so it absorbs into the system. It's like I kind of look at it as like a buffered aspirin. It helps you get more product to where it needs to go.
Yeah, without actually taking more of the levodopa.
Yeah, so I actually take 4 different meds now. I take the levodopa 4 times, or now 6 times a day. I take something called Requip, which is the dopamine agonist. I take that in the morning and first time in the morning, last at night. And then I take something called Artane, which is for the tremors. I take that 3 times a day. And then I take the Entacapone 6 times a day. I take it when I have my carbidopa, levodopa. I take my Entacapone at the same time. Matter of fact, what did I just do with it? And this helps me tremendously. I take them 6 times a day, and this is my container that has six individual sections.
Right.
So the one down here in the middle, that's going to be my 5 o'clock meds, and then the last one is my 7 o'clock, 7:30 meds. So every 2 weeks, I just sit down with all these. I take the lids off all of them. I get all my medicines. I put one. I fill them up. So each day, I just grab one of these, and I know they have all my meds for the day. And then on my phone, I have an alarm that goes off every 2.5 hours to remind me it's time to take my medication.
Right.
I find that way I'm prepared and I'm not, and I tell people too, is the medications we take are meant for maintenance. They're not slowing the progress. They're not doing anything to the underlying Parkinson's. They're just helping you function with what's going on. So if you miss a dose, it's not that big of a deal. You don't have to stress out on it. Your symptoms may be a little bit worse, but as soon as you take your next dose, you're back to even.
Right.
It's kind of, I think people get overwhelmed, and I try to with my conversations when I'm talking to groups, I try to keep it as simple as possible because we have enough going. You got to deal with all you're dealing with, and you got a wife, you got still a kid at home, you got all this crap. You need to take as much stress out of your life as possible.
Let me ask you a question that you probably know the answer to. I do not know, but it's a silly question, but it only occurred to me recently.
No silly questions.
Is L-DOPA the same thing as levodopa? They're interchangeable terms. I think it
Yeah,
probably is.
some people, when you take the cinnamon, it's carbidopa, levodopa. And the
Right.
standard is usually 25/100. The
Right.
carbidopa is helping your stomach absorb the levodopa, because if you take levodopa straight, then it has issues. You can have stomach issues.
Right.
So the carbidopa is like going back to the buffered aspirin concept. It helps your body, in your stomach. It helps it, progress into the bloodstream. But levodopa and carbidopa, or levodopa or L-dopa, are basically the same thing.
Okay. Thank you. I thought
Yeah.
it would be, but I hadn't had a chance to ask anybody that knew for sure.
Well, there's probably over 100 different medications you can take for Parkinson's. So to me, the value I have of my neurologist now is he's known me for 9 years, and he's the one who's basically making my cocktail for me every 6 months. I don't need to see a neurologist in a sense, because he sees me, he knows what my Parkinson's is. But moving forward, my relationship with him is he's become I call it like a jiffy lube. I go there to get my oil changed and tires rotated, and I come back in 6 months. That's kind of the way I'm approaching my relationship with him. But Joe, we've been talking for almost an hour, so we usually try to keep it around an hour. Is there any last thing you'd like to throw out?
No, not in particular. I'm glad to have a chance to speak with you and get to know you a little bit. And
We're always here.
thank you for asking me to participate.
Yeah, well, so just a couple takeaways I've seen is that advocate for yourself. It's overwhelming. Get help when you need help. Join a support group. But the biggest thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help, because that's what makes us better. I mean, there's so much help out there. You just got to ask for it, and there's a lot of good people in this community that are willing to step in and help you.
I tell people in my support group fairly often that there's a lot of people that don't have Parkinson's that are working on things to try to help us. And these foundations are publishing books and giving them away, and all these things, that resources that are being provided. There's lots of nice people. I've met a lot of nice people since having this, and I'm very impressed with their heart for what we're trying to deal with, and I'm thankful for those people that are trying to help us.
Yeah, I jokingly say, if you meet a real nice, well, one of the precursors to possibly having Parkinson's is that you're a really nice person, because everybody I've met with Parkinson's is a nice person. So that must be a sign that you may have Parkinson's.
It may be.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, let me know how that phone call works out for you. If I can do any other help, just please give me a shout.
Thank you. I will. Nice talking with you.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. It was a great hour, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone. Joe, you have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Oops, not that. See ya.